Oh, yeah, also, this is our test 3 review. And remember, this goes over our chapter 4 material. Oh, yeah, also, question 1 wants me to evaluate the polynomial. For the given values of the variable. All right, so remember, this is number 1, okay? So my polynomial is going to be P of X equals 4x squared minus 2x plus 5. Y'all, what they want us to find is P of 4, P of a negative 2, and P of 0. All right, so we're going to have to do this 3 times using each of these numbers in place of the X, okay? I'm going to start with P4. So P of 4, I'm going to bring down my 4. In parentheses, I'm going to put the 4 in for the X. Square that. Minus 2, put the 4 in for that X. And then plus 5. So you're working this using order of operations. So the first step is that exponent. So bring the first 4 down. Inside the parentheses, I'm going to figure out what 4 times 4 is. So 4 times 4 is a positive 16. And y'all, I'm just going to bring everything else down. So the only thing I did that step was the exponent. Now I'm going to multiply where I need to. So the first 2 numbers get multiplied. And then these 2 numbers get multiplied. So 4 times 16 gives me 64. Minus 2 times 4 is minus 8. And then bring down my plus 5. So I'm just sort of following order of operations, exponent first, and then I multiplied everything I could left to right. Now add and subtract going left to right. So 64 minus 8 is 56. So if you want that extra step in there, I'm going to subtract them 2 first. Then I'll take that 56 plus 5, and that'll give me a 61. So P of 4 equals 61. Now we're going to do P of negative 2. So I'm going to bring down my 4. In place of the X, I'm going to put a negative 2, square that. Minus 2 times my negative 2 plus 5. So all we did, remember, is put the negative 2 in for the 2 X's. Y'all, we still got to start with that exponent. So bring the first 4 down. Now, figure out what negative 2 times negative 2. That's going to give me a positive 4. Then I'm just going to bring everything else down. So if you notice, I'm basically doing the same steps as I did over here. Now I'm going to multiply. 4 times 4 gives me 16. Now watch out here, because we're subtracting 2 times negative 2, which will be subtracting a negative 4. But remember, when you subtract a negative 4, you're going to make that a positive 4, and then bring down that positive 5. All right, so once again, I'll add left to right. So 16 plus 4 gives me 20, plus my 5. And y'all, 20 plus 5 gives us 25. So then we find P of 0. So that'll equal 4 times 0 squared minus 2 times 0 plus 5. All right, so technically I would do the exponent first. 0 times 0 is 0. I'm going to bring everything else down. Once again, I'm going to multiply left to right. 4 times 0 is 0. Minus 2 times 0 is 0. Plus my 5. All right, y'all, 0 minus 0 is 0. And 0 plus 5 gives us a 5. Anytime you put 0 in for a polynomial like this, all the variables will become 0. So the answer usually is that last number, just like I got on mine, okay? All right, y'all, next number 2. Number 2 wants us to add. So they're giving me 3r squared plus 10g squared plus 10. We're going to add that to 4r squared minus 8g squared minus 2. So remember, when you're adding, we can drop the parentheses and everything keeps the same sign as it had inside the parentheses. So we'll have a 3r squared plus 10g squared plus 10 plus my 4r squared minus my 8g squared minus 2. So remember, on adding, we can drop the parentheses and everything keeps the same sign as it had inside the parentheses. Now, let's match up our like terms. R squared will add to the r squared. So we have 3r squared plus 4r squared gives me 7r squared. Now remember, when you're adding, you cannot change exponents, okay? When you add like terms, they will stay what they look like. So then I'll take the 10g squared, add that to a negative 8g squared. So basically 10 minus 8, that's going to give me a positive 2g squared. And then I'll add the numbers to the numbers. That 10 adds to that negative 2. So basically 10 minus 2 gives me a positive 8. Y'all, that's our final answer. Now, here's the one where you got to watch out for, and that is subtraction. So to subtract, they're giving me negative 10v squared plus 5v plus 9 minus 9v squared plus 9v minus 4. So remember, when we got subtraction, we got to distribute the subtraction to all 3 terms in the second parentheses. And to distribute subtraction, you treat it like a negative 1 there, and you're just multiplying that negative 1 times everything in here. So the first parentheses, we bring down exactly like they look. Negative 10v squared plus 5v plus 9. And y'all, what this negative 1 is going to do is it's going to change the signs of everything inside the parentheses when I bring it out. Negative 1 times 9 makes that a negative 9v squared. Negative 1 times 9 makes that a negative 9v. And then that negative 1 times that negative 4 makes that a positive 4. So subtraction, everything inside the second parentheses changed signs when I brought them out. All right, so I got rid of the parentheses. Now I'm going to add like terms. The v squared adds to the v squared. -10 and a -9 give you a -19 v squared. Remember, when you add like signs, you add the numbers together and keep that sign. Right, this 5v adds to that -9v. So now remember, these are unlike signs. So you subtract the numbers. 9 minus 5 is 4, but you give it the sign of the larger number. So my larger number is negative. That'll be a -4v. And y'all did my numbers. I got a 9 added to a +4. So those are like signs. So I'm adding them together. 9 and 4 is 13. And they keep their sign. So y'all, what they really try to get you on is subtraction. You got to distribute that negative, okay? So y'all, then once we got through subtraction, we started multiplying. So for number 4, they got a 5c minus 4 times 6c plus 6. And this is where I taught y'all to FOIL. So the first ones was 5c times 6c. Now y'all, remember, when you multiply the c times the c, you're adding those exponents together. So c to the first times c to the first. So here we go. 5 times 6 will give me 30. The c times c, you have 1 plus 1. So that'll give you a c squared. Then I take that 5c times that 6. So 5 times 6 gives me 30c. So you got to watch these signs as you're going. Positive times positive, give me positive. Positive times positive, give me a positive. But y'all, now on the inside, I got a -4 times a 6c. A negative times a positive will make that a negative. And 4 times 6c is a 24c. And then here you got a -4 going to multiply by a +6. That's going to be a negative. And then 4 times 6 is 24. But y'all remember, I got like terms in the middle. So you always got to look for like terms after you multiply. So the c's will subtract these c's. So I'm going to bring down my 30c squared, because it has nothing over here to add to. The 30 and the -24c give me a +6c. So that takes care of my like terms. And at the end, bring down that -24. Okay, so watch for signs as you're going through these, okay? All right, y'all, multiply again. We're going to have a lot of multiplying. This one has a minus p times a minus p. But these are not conjugate pairs, so they're both negative. So when they're both negative, you're not going to cancel anything out on this, but you'll have two terms in the middle that are identical, okay? So watch what I want y'all to see. A times A is a, remember, add those 1 plus 1. That gives me a squared. That A times that negative P, that's going to be a negative AP. So y'all, thing I do with these, I always keep them in alphabetical order. Because look right here, that negative P times that A, that's going to be a negative AP. So negative PA would be right, but It's easier to tell that you got like terms if you keep them in alphabetical order. Now, y'all be careful right here. A negative P times a negative P. A negative times a negative is a positive. And remember, that's a P1 times a P1. So I'm going to add those exponents. 1 plus 1 gives me a P squared. Now, y'all notice this. Those like terms don't cancel because they're both negative. So bring down your A squared. Remember, that's a negative 1 AP. Since it don't have a number in front, you got to treat it like a 1. So negative 1 plus this negative 1 gives you a negative 2 AP. Notice I did not change the way they looked. And then at the end is a positive P squared. So if you notice, the only time I can change exponents is when I multiply. And it has to be the same multiplying, the same variable being multiplied by itself for me to change that variable, okay? So y'all, the main thing on this test really is just to watch out for your signs. All right, guess what? 6, multiply again. But y'all, this time they gave us a R plus F times R squared minus RF plus F squared. So this was one of the bigger ones. But what we got to do first, distribute this R times everybody over here. Then we distribute the F times everybody over here. So here we go. Remember, there's a 1 by, if it don't got an exponent, it's all 1s by them, okay? So this R times R squared, 1 plus 2 gives me a R to the third. This R times this negative RF, that's going to be a negative. The R times R gives you a R squared, and then bring down the F with it. So basically, all I'm doing is adding 1 R to all of these. And then finally, the R times the F squared will give me a positive RF squared. Now, y'all, the only reason I'm not doing alphabetical order here is because I'm following what they did in the middle, RF. So if I get any more RFs, I'm going to keep them in that order. Now, distribute the F through these parentheses. F times R squared, and notice they're both positive. So that's going to be a positive R squared F. So once again, I'm just keeping them in the same order with the letters as they did. This F squared times, that F times that negative RF will be a negative RF squared. And then this F times this F squared will be a positive 1 plus 2 gives me a F to the third. All right, so now you can tell your like terms are going to be this R squared F and that R squared F. And then this RF squared and that RF squared. So let's see what we get. We bring down our R to the third. So let's do the R squared F's first. You got a negative 1 and a positive 1. Well, y'all, negative 1 and positive 1 add to 0. So those basically cancel out. So let's add the RF squareds. to the negative RS squareds. Well, once again, I got a positive 1 and a negative 1. So those factors cancel out. So all I got to do now is bring down my positive f to the third. So that my final answer is a r cubed plus f cubed. So this one, notice when I distributed the r, all I did was add one r to everybody. When I distributed the f, I just added one f to everybody. Okay? And then look for like terms. So that's probably one of your more trickier ones on here. All right, y'all, once again, number 7, multiply. So I got a 5x plus 6, and I got a 5x minus 6. These are definitely conjugate pairs. They look exactly the same, except one's being added and one's being subtracted. And I'll put it over here. Anytime you multiply conjugate pairs like this, so if you got, say, a plus b times a minus b, you're going to end up with a squared minus b squared. You're going to end up with that difference of perfect square stuff that we were factoring on Tuesday, okay? So I will fold it all the way out so that you see that. So the 5x times 5x, 1 plus 1 will make that a 25x squared. 5x times negative 6 gives me a negative 30x. On the inside, 6 times 5x gives me a positive 30x. And then finally, the 6 times negative 6 gives me a negative 36. So do y'all see what happens in the middle here, these conjugate pairs? Negative 30 plus 30, those cancel out. So I'm left with my 25x squared minus my 36. So y'all, the conjugate pairs always follow this pattern and end up as the difference of perfect squares. All right, so then they wanted us to do another one with conjugate pairs. 4v plus 3t times a 4v minus 3t. And y'all remember, since these are conjugate pairs, I will end up with something like this. So let's multiply and see. 4v times 4v is a 16v squared. 4v times negative 3t is a negative 12. And I'm going to put mine in alphabetical order and make that a tv. In the middle, 3t times 4v is a positive 12 tv. And then y'all finally, the 3t times negative 3t is a negative 9t. 1 plus 1 makes that a t squared. Well, y'all, did it happen again? Negative 12 in the middle, positive 12. Those like terms cancel again. And conjugate pairs will always cancel the middle. So that I end up with my 16v squared minus my 9t squared. So y'all look, every time, all these conjugate pairs will follow that pattern, okay? Now you also want to turn my page because it's sort of curling up on me. All right, so then at 9, y'all, 9, we started getting into the factoring. Now this one wants me to factor out a factor with a negative coefficient. They're giving us negative 3s to the 4th plus a 6s minus 12. So you're basically factoring out a GCF on this is what they're asking. And they said they want it to be negative. So I'm factoring out a negative number no matter what. So y'all, what does a 3, 6, and 12 all have in common that I can factor out? So I'm going to pull my chat up. So perfect, we're going to factor out a negative 3. Good job. Now notice, you're not factoring out an S because all of these don't have an S. So all we're going to be basically doing is dividing all 3 of the numbers by that negative 3. So negative 3 divided by negative 3 makes that a 1s to the 4th. But y'all watch this. 6s, 6 divided by negative 3 makes that a negative 2s. So what this negative's doing is it's changing all the signs when I put it inside these parentheses. And how about that negative 12? Negative 12 divided by that negative 3 makes that a positive 4. So now we've done what they asked. We factored out a factor with a negative coefficient, which was our negative 3. Now here's the second one I consider sort of tough. And this was the factor by grouping. Remember, this is where I had 4 terms. So I've got an x to the 3rd plus a 9x squared minus an 8x minus 72. So if you remember, y'all, factor by grouping, I made 2 sets of factors and then the last 2 sets of factors or terms. And from each term, we have to factor out a GCF. So first of all, I'm going to figure out what the GCF of the first 2 terms is, factor out the GCF of the second 2 terms, and then we'll factor it out and write our parentheses. So I got an x to the 3rd and a 9x squared. What these 2 terms have in common is an x squared. Remember, when you compare the variables, the GCF always has the smallest exponent. Now, the second GCF always has the same sign as that 3rd term. So that second GCF has to be a negative. And then y'all, 8 and a 72, both of them, the greatest factor they both have in common would be the 8. So my second GCF, we're going to factor out that negative 8. And that's why they were sort of doing this work with you, so you would be good at factoring out these negative numbers. All right, so what's going to happen? We'll have our first GCF followed by the parentheses, our second GCF followed by parentheses. Remember, at this point, these parentheses got to match up. So y'all, here we go. If we got an x to the 3rd, divide out an x squared, 3 minus 2 leaves you 1x. So when you're dividing, you're basically subtracting exponents. When you multiply, you added them. And watch this, 9x squared, divide that x squared out, you're left with a 9. So let's see over here, negative 8x. If you divide by the negative 8, you end up with a 1x. And if you take that negative 72, divide by that negative 8, you end up with a positive 9. So notice, both my parentheses have an x plus 9 in them. So we treat the x plus 9 like it's a GCF of these two terms. So we're going to factor out, remember to factor out that GCF of the x plus 9 from both of those. The second parentheses was what was left. But if I took the x plus 9 out of the x squared times x plus 9, I'm left with the x squared. And then for the negative 8x plus 9, if you take out that x plus 9, you're left with the minus 8. So y'all, that is factor by grouping. Set up your two groups, factor out these GCFs. Now notice this final answer. It's the x plus 9 GCF here. And then the second parentheses is always these GCFs you brought out in the very beginning. So y'all, that's probably our second trickiest one, is that number 10, okay? All right, factor the trinomial. So this is where y'all had to learn my signs on this. A squared minus 15a plus 50. So y'all notice the first thing I look for is a GCF, but there's no GCF in these three terms. There's not an A after the 50, so there's no GCFs. So we're going to go straight into our parentheses. A squared puts an A in the front of both of these. Now, y'all, here's where I'm going to put my signs in. Remember, this last number is positive. Anytime the last number is positive, both of these factors will have the same sign as that middle number. So they'll both be minus. So y'all, what I need now are factors of 50 that add to get me 15. So you can break down your numbers. So I think that's the only three ways to get it. But remember, if you don't know your factors, go to your calculator and do y equals, do 50 divided by x, and then look at that table, okay? But y'all, the ones that add to 15 for me are 10 and 5. So I put in my 10, put in my 5, and we're done. So to me, the trick on factoring is getting these signs. Now remember, if you wanted to check yourself, add your two numbers. Does negative 10 and negative 5 equal to negative 15 in the middle? Yes. Does negative 10 times negative 5 multiply to give me the 50 at the end? Yes. Okay. Alrighty, y'all, check this one out. Factor again. So pretty much the whole last part of this test is going to be nothing but your factoring. But y'all watch this one. It got 72 plus a b minus a b squared. So remember, your first thing to do to this is get this thing in order. So we're going to rearrange this. But y'all look, my b squared is negative. So I'm going to have a negative b squared plus my b plus my 72. But y'all, here's the thing on this one. We can't factor this with that negative, so we got to factor that negative out of this. That's why we were learning all that negative stuff up above. So on this one, Since there's no other numbers in common, we at least got to factor out a -1 on this. Now remember, if I don't put a 1 behind that, it's understood to be a -1. Now what you're going to do is take all three of these and divide by that -1. So a negative divided by negative makes that a b squared. A positive divided by negative makes that a -b. And then a positive 72 divided by that negative makes that a -72. So if your b squared term is negative, factor out the negative, and notice it changed everybody's sign inside the parentheses. Now we got to figure out how to factor this part. So we're going to bring this negative down. Remember, that negative has to be in the final answer. There's no other GCF, so I'm going to go straight to my parentheses. The b squared is a b and a b. So y'all watch this. This time my last number is negative. Anytime the last number is negative, one of these is positive, one is negative. So now let me start playing with my factors of 72. Woo, I think there's a lot of these. What, 3 and 24? That means what, 4? Woo, y'all, so let's go to calculator. There's so many on this, I'm gonna show you. When there's a lot of factors, I'm gonna go to my calculator. And remember, my number 72, so I'm going to y equals, and I'm going to do 72 divide by x. And then I'm going to go to second graph to pull up the table. All right, y'all, let me do one thing first. Let me change this from yellow. Well, I'm going to make this where we can actually see it. I'm going to go back to black. All right, so now let me go to my table, second graph. All right, so I don't want these negative numbers, so let me arrow down until I get it all these positive numbers. So 0. So look, there's 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18. Let's see, 5, no, 6 and 12. And then let's see, 8 and 9. All right, woo, we got a lot of factors on that one. So let's go back to our paper now that I got my factors. So remember, since the last one's negative, you want two factors over here that subtract and give you a 1. Because remember, there's not a number there. It's like a -1b. So the two numbers that factor that subtract to give me a 1 are 9 and 8. Since the middle number is negative, the larger factor is negative. So the 9 will be negative, the 8 will be positive. So y'all, let's check it. Does 8 and -9 equal -1? Yes. Does 8 times -9 equal -72? Yes. So always check yourself by seeing if they add to get the middle and multiply to get the last. And remember, in MathLab, you got to put the negative. All righty, y'all. So notice this thing's a lot of factoring. So I'm on what, number 13? So let me change my paper. Starting to flip up. Oh, y'all, look at this factor again. 80c plus 2c squared minus a c to the third. Y'all, we're gonna get good at factoring because next week We got a lot of factoring we're going to be doing again next week, okay? So the first thing you want to do this is rearrange it. So we got to rearrange. So the biggest exponent is the 3, so the negative c third goes first. Then we bring down the positive 2c squared. And then the positive 80c. So we definitely got some GCFs here. Since we got a negative in front, we got to factor out that negative. And y'all look at this. All 3 of these have at least one C in them. So we're going to factor out a negative C from all of this. So bring our negative C out front. And if you remember, factoring out a negative C, that's going to take one C away from everybody. And that negative is going to change all the signs when I put them in these parentheses. Because it's negative divided by negative makes this a positive. 3 minus 1 leaves me a C squared. 2 divided by negative, this one's going to be a negative 2. 2 minus 1 leaves me 1C. Positive 80 divided by negative makes that a negative 80. And look at that. The 1C cancels with the 1C. There we go. All right, so we got this negative C factored out front. We know there's no more GCF, so this thing will now factor into 2 sets of parentheses. The C squared gives me a C and a C. Remember, the last number's negative, so one of these is positive, one's negative. All right, y'all, so I got to play up the factors of 80 now. And these factors of 80 got to subtract to get me a 2. Remember, the last sign tells you that like signs are unlike. It also tells you whether you want your factors to add or subtract to get the middle number. So y'all, 80 is another big number, so let's go find some factors on that calculator. I'm going to go to my calculator. I'm going to go to y equals and clear this. And I'm going to do 80 divided by my x. And let me go to my second graph to pull up the table. All right, y'all, so I'm going to go back up to where they start at 1. So we got 1 and 80, 2 and 40, 4 and 20, 5 and 16, 8 and 10. And then notice they start repeating 10 and 8. So we're good on factors. So what did I need? I needed a 2. So the ones that subtract to get me 2 are 10 and 8. The middle number's negative, so the larger factor will be negative. So that's going to be a negative 10 and a positive 8. Then y'all notice I had a C3 here. Look how many C's I got in my answer. 1, 2, 3. When I had x squareds, I had 2 x's. So really the highest exponent tells me also how many of that variable I need when I'm done, okay? All right, let's see where we at now. So we're on 14. So once again, factor the trinomial. All right, y'all, watch this. R squared plus 9RG plus 20G squared. So notice there's not a GCF because the R is not in the last term and the G is not in the first term. So that means we're going straight into our parentheses. But y'all, we know this. We know that R squared means there's going to be an R in front of both of these. We also know that the G squared at the end means there's going to be a G at the end of both of our parentheses. So all we got to do now is put our signs and find our numbers. So remember, the last sign's positive here. So since that's positive, both of these factors will be positive, like the middle number. So what we want now are factors of 20 that'll add to get a 9. So let's play with our 20. That's 1 and 20, 2 and 10. What's next? 4 and 5. Remember, it's positive, so these factors got to add to get 9. So that'll be 4 and 5. So we put in our 4 and our 5. So the RG in the middle, you get from the 4G times R, the R times 5G. Those two terms would add to get that middle, okay? So remember, R squared in the beginning puts an R in the front. G squared puts a G at the back. All right, y'all. What's this one? Factor completely. So once again, factor as far as we can go on this. So they got a 5y squared minus 40y minus 100. Remember, the first thing I'm looking for is a GCF. So I'm going to look at these three numbers, and y'all guess what? They all have a common factor. All three of these numbers will divide by that 5. So my GCF is going to be the 5. So to factor out the GCF of 5, we're going to divide all three of these numbers by 5 and put that into parentheses. So 5 divided by 5 gives me 1y squared minus, now notice this ain't a negative 5 I'm pulling out, so everything will keep the same sign as it did up here. So that negative 40 divided by 5 makes that a negative 8y minus 100 divided by 5 is a 20. And when they say factored completely, that means we now got to factor these parentheses. So bring down my 5. We know this will factor into parentheses now because we pulled out the GCF already. So we got a y squared. That's going to be a y and a y. Remember, the last sign's negative, so one's positive, one's negative. And I need factors of 20 that'll subtract and get an 8. Well, y'all, here's my factors of 20. And the ones that'll subtract and get me an 8 are going to be 2 and 10. So let me write them again. So I need 2 and 10. Since the middle number is negative, the larger factor is negative. So the 10 will be negative, and the 2 will be our positive. And y'all at that point can't go no further. So remember, I had a y squared, so I had 2 y's in that final answer, okay? So that's what you got to check on when you're done is, do I have enough of that variable down here? Like up here, I had what, the C3, I had 3 C's. Here I had an R squared, 2 R's, a G squared, 2 G's. So those exponents sort of tell you how many of them variables you need when you're done, okay? All right, y'all, so let me pull back up. So number 16. And y'all, do y'all realize that today we are halfway through this course? Right, this is our 5th week. We'll have 5 more to go after this, okay? All right, y'all, factor the trinomial. All right, so I got a 4b squared minus 10b. Whoops, hang on, let me rewrite that. My bad. 4b squared minus 10 minus 18b. So y'all look here, they have this one out of order. So we're going to rearrange. So I want my 4b squared first, my negative 18b second, and then my minus 10. So look here. The only number that all three of these will divide by, I wished it was the 4, but it ain't. The biggest number I can divide all three of these by is a GCF of a 2. So we're going to factor out a 2 from all three of these by dividing their numbers by 2. So 4 divided by 2 leaves me a 2b squared minus 18 divided by 2 gives me a 9b minus 10 divided by 2 leaves me a 5. And y'all look at that. I got to factor this further, but this time I've still got a number in front. So remember, when I got a number in front, I'm going to have to multiply that number times the last one to find my factors. So first I'm going to bring down that 2. And I know for now that will factor into 2 sets of parentheses. So let's figure out what our last number is going to be. 2 times 5 equals 10. So last number is negative. So, well, let's get our b squared. That'll be a b and a b. Last one is negative. So one's positive, one's negative. So let's find factors of 10. That'll subtract and give me a 9. Oh, y'all, so let's see. 1 and 10. And then I got what? 2 and 5. So the ones that subtract to get to 9 are the 1 and 10. The 9 is negative, so the larger number is negative. So the 10 will be negative, and the 1 will be positive. But y'all, I'm not going to forget tonight, because remember, since I borrowed that 2 to multiply by the 5 to get to 10, I now got to divide that 2 out of both of my numbers. All right, so I'm going to bring that 2 down. Now notice, 1/2 does not simplify. So since I'm factoring, I got to bring the 2 in front of the b. That's going to give me a 2b plus 1. This one I can divide by 10, 10 divided by 2. So that's going to give me what? A b minus 10 divided by 2 is 5. And y'all, at that point, we're done. But notice you had a b squared, so you got 2 b's in that final answer. So this number 16 had a lot because you had a GCF, and then we had to factor what I call the AC method. You multiplied the first number times the last, got my 10, found my factors of 10 that gave me 9, and then I had to divide them both by that 2 that I borrowed, okay? Oh, y'all, look at this. Factor the trinomial. $12r squared minus 26r plus 12. Well, I know there's at least some kind of GCF here. So let's see. I know I can get a 2 out of all these. So I'm just going to see if I can't get nothing bigger. 4, but not that. And 26 won't divide by 4. 6s won't go into 26. Yo, I think that's it. So I think the only GCF I can factor out is that 2, okay? So here we go. We're going to factor out a 2. So basically this 17 is looking like it might be just like this 16. So if I factor out a 2, I get a 6r squared minus 26 divided by 2 is 13r plus 12 divided by 2 gives me my 6. So once again, we're going to have to borrow that 6 to multiply. So let's get it set up. We know this will be 2 parentheses. We know there's going to be an R in front of both of these parentheses. This thing is positive. So since it's positive, we know both of these will be negative like the middle number. All right, y'all, so let's see what we get. 6 times 6 is 36. Now, since that's positive, I won't factor the 36. That'll add to get me that 13. So y'all, let's play with that. We got 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and then 6 and 6. So since I had to get a 13, that would be my 9 and 4. And y'all, since they're both negative, it don't matter who we put first. We can put the 4 first and then the 9, or we can put the 9 first and then the 4. Now, what did I have to do? I got to come in and divide both these by the 6 that I borrowed. So let's see, the first thing I'm going to do, both of these will reduce. 4 over 6, if you divide both these by 2, you'll get a 2 over 3. Over here, the 9 and 6 will both divide by 3. If I do that, I'll get a 3 halves. Now, let me bring this down just a little. Remember, my last step, since I got fractions, is to bring my numbers in front of the variable. So this one will give me a 3r minus 2. This one will give me a 2r minus 3. Okay, so borrow the 6, get all your numbers, but then divide that 6 back out. Now, since both of these reduced as fractions, I had to pull the bottom, the denominator went in front of the variable on both fractions, okay? All right, y'all, so I'm finally done with factoring, other than we got to solve 3 more equations, okay? All right, y'all, so our 3 equations starting at 18, all these say is solve. Now this one has r squared plus 2r equals 0. Now remember, when we got to r squared stuff, we got to solve these by factoring. So remember, the first step I said on factoring on these equations was to look for a GCF. Well, y'all, guess what? This does have a GCF. These both have at least an R in them. So we're going to factor the R out and put what's left in these parentheses. So 2 minus 1 leaves me 1R. And then the 2R divided by R, the R's cancel, leaving you a 2. So y'all remember, anytime I factored out the variable as a GCF, it always had a special answer. Because now we're going to set both of these factors equal to 0. And we're invoking what I called the 0 product rule at this point. So set both your factors equal to 0. So look here, the GCF always gives you a 0 for its answer. The other factor you got to actually solve by subtracting 2. And I get R equals a -2. So remember, in MATLAB, you got to put both of these answers, 0, comma, -2. All right, so 19, they want me to solve again. I got a v squared equals 25. So this one, I need a 0 where the 25 is, remember? So since that needs to be a 0, I need to subtract 25 from both sides. So y'all look what that gives me. That's going to give me a v squared minus 25. On the right side, I now have my 0. So this was the difference of perfect square stuff. And it said if I have a squared minus b squared, that factored into a plus b and a minus b. So it undoes those conjugate pairs when you FOIL them to get the difference of perfect squares. If you factor the difference of perfect squares, you end up as conjugate pairs. So we know there's going to be 2 sets of parentheses. The v squared was a v and a v. The last sign's negative, so one's positive, one's negative. And basically, since there's not a v in the middle, you treat it like a 0. So you're finding factors of 25 that'll give you a 0. So the answer to that would be the square root of 25. Remember, these are the ones where I said, hey, square root of 25, that was 5. So that puts a 5 here and a 5 here. So that's what this is telling us, is that the square root of a squared, a and a, the square root of the b squared will be the b and the b. So y'all, the square root of the v squared was a v and a v. The square root of the 25 was a 5 and a 5. And then remember at that point, set both of your factors equal to 0. So now I'll solve this one by subtracting 5 from both sides. I get v is a -5. Right here, I'll add 5 to both sides. And I get v is a +5. So that's the trick on these quadratic equations, is getting them all equal to 0, like we had up here, and doing some kind of factoring to them. So y'all, that leaves us number 20. And guess what? Number 20 will be a solve again. 6c squared plus a c equals 2. So remember, first step, that 2 needs to be a 0. So I'm going to subtract a 2 from both sides. Now the 2 is not like terms with none of this, so I'm just going to put them in order. 6c squared plus my c minus 2, all equal to 0. So there's no GCF on this because I don't have a number in front of this c, and then this one don't even have a variable. So there's no GCF. So we're going to go straight into parentheses for a moment. C squared will be a c and a c. Last sign's negative, so one's positive, one's negative. Now, this is where I have to multiply 6 times 2 is 12. So remember, 12, I need factors of that 12 that'll subtract and give me a 1. Remember, once again, that's like a 1 in front of the c. So we got 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. So the factors that'll subtract and give me 1 are 4 and 3. Middle number's positive, so the larger factor will be positive. So the 4 will be positive, and the 3 will be negative. Now remember, all this is still equal to 0. And since I borrowed that 6 to get my 12, I now have to divide both these by the 6. So my first step is to reduce my fractions. So I'm going to get a C plus 4 and 6 are both divided by 2, making that a 2/3. Over here, 3 and 6 are both divided by 3, making that a 1/2. Now, y'all, here's the trick on this one. Since I'm actually solving an equation, I don't want to put the 3 in front and the 2 in front, because that'll give me more work when I solve this. So what I'm going to do is just take both of these factors and set them equal to 0. So here I'm going to subtract 2/3 from both sides. And I'm going to get C equals a negative 2/3. So remember, the solutions are always opposite in sign than your factors. And then over here, I'm going to add 1/2 to both sides. And I get C equals a positive 1/2. So y'all, let me show you what happens. Say I did move the 3 in front, and I made that a 3C plus 2 equals 0. And then I did the same thing here. Watch what's happening. I'm giving myself more work. And I'll get 3C equals negative 2. But then I'd have to come back in and divide that 3. So that I get C equals a negative 2/3. So I say, why move the 3 there when you're going to have to divide it anyway? Notice there's my 2/3 negative. There's my negative 2/3. So factoring, yes, I want to move that up to the front, but I'm solving an equation. When I'm solving an equation, I'm just going to leave it as a fraction, okay? So that way's more work. All right, y'all, let me see. So, oh, that was number 20, right? So, y'all, that is your test 3, which covers chapter 4. So remember, test 3 is due Sunday night. Now, next week, the reason you're learning all this factoring is because next week, we're going to be doing a lot of factoring and simplifying things that look like fractions and all that fun stuff. We'll be multiplying these things, dividing, all that fun stuff. So I'm going to stop this share real quick. So, any questions, y'all? And remember, I'll get this sent out. Give me about an hour, and then I'll have it sent out for you, okay? And then I've been also putting them in Blackboard for you. So, any questions, anybody? All right, so I'm going to stop my recording.